Picture this. It's April of 1912, and a magnificent British ocean liner is setting out on its highly anticipated maiden voyage. At the time, it was widely considered the absolute pinnacle of engineering, literally an unsinkable marvel of the modern age. But here's the thing. Its destination, its passengers, and its ultimate legacy would forever bind it to the American shore. Today, we're going to dive into this legendary maritime disaster in this explainer, looking at it through a completely unique, connection-driven lens. We'll uncover exactly how a transatlantic tragedy permanently reshaped American history.
So you might be wondering, how exactly did a British ship become an undeniably American story? Well, it's a pretty fascinating paradox when you really dig into the historical records. You see, the RMS Titanic was an industrial triumph forged in Belfast, Northern Ireland. It was designed and built to serve a massive British shipping conglomerate, the White Star Line. So by all physical accounts, it was a British vessel through and through. And yet, as we trace its tragic path across the freezing North Atlantic, we uncover a legacy that's woven deeply into the social, cultural, and political fabric of the United States.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, an American destination, the dream of a new life.
Now, the Titanic's maiden voyage in April of 1912 was a straight shot from Southampton, England, directly over to New York City, and its arrival was anticipated to be a massive societal event. In fact, Pier 59 in Manhattan had been specially prepped for a grand celebration just to welcome this floating palace. This specific route and the intense buildup all across the United States really transformed the Titanic from a mere feat of mechanical engineering into this massive transatlantic vessel of the American dream. The city was practically holding its breath, waiting for this technological marvel to appear on the horizon. And if you look at the passenger list itself, it was a true cross-section of the world, perfectly mirroring the larger story of American immigration at the time. Up top, you had some of the wealthiest, most prominent American industrialists returning home from European vacations in lavish first-class suites. But deep down in the ship's steerage were hundreds of immigrants from all across Europe. For these third-class passengers, the ship wasn't just luxury transportation, right? It was a beacon of absolute optimism, a literal vehicle moving them toward the promise of a brand new life and endless opportunity in the United States.
Moving on to Section 2, built to impress, the height of Gilded Age luxury.
2,200. That is the staggering number of passengers and crew entrusted to this maiden voyage. To put that into perspective, these human lives represented a perfect microcosm of Gilded Age society packed tightly into what was essentially a floating city. You had the absolute elite of high society, dining on multi-course meals under crystal chandeliers, and then, just decks below, hopeful families sharing modest bunks. But they were all trusting in a vessel that promised both unparalleled luxury and absolute, unquestionable security.
The Titanic was hailed worldwide as the largest passenger ship ever built, and it was heavily promoted for its watertight compartments and advanced safety features. Yet, it carried lifeboats sufficient for only about half of the people aboard. And here's the crucial, deeply frustrating historical insight. This wasn't actually illegal. No, maritime laws at the time, specifically the British Board of Trade regulations, were dangerously outdated. They basically based a ship's lifeboat requirements on its sheer weight and tonnage rather than its human capacity. So the Titanic technically exceeded the legal requirements of the day, but obviously it was a glaring hubristic flaw in the system, one that made the ship a ticking time bomb.
Which brings us to Section 3, Night of the Disaster, Tragedy in the North Atlantic.
The sequence of events unfolded with terrifying speed, completely shattering the illusion that humanity had somehow finally conquered nature. Following that incredibly optimistic April 10th departure from Southampton, the ship enjoyed just a few short days of calm seas. But late on the night of April 14th, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the freezing, pitch-black North Atlantic. Despite its impenetrable reputation, the vessel immediately began taking on water. And in the early, dark hours of April 15th, 1912, the unsinkable ship sank beneath the surface.
1,500, because of that severe lifeboat shortage we talked about, and a highly chaotic, panicked evacuation process in the dead of night, more than 1,500 people perished in those freezing waters. The human cost was simply incomprehensible. Entire families were lost. Prominent business leaders and hopeful immigrants alike met the exact same tragic fate, and countless dreams of starting a new life in America were suddenly extinguished in just a matter of hours.
Only roughly 700 people survived the freezing night in those lifeboats. When the rescue ship, the Carpathia, finally arrived in New York a few days later, it docked in the pouring rain, and it was met by a crowd of tens of thousands of grieving Americans. Because the ship was bound for New York, the devastation rippled instantly through local American communities. Families who had been waiting at the docks with immense joy were instead completely shattered. The tragedy was no longer a distant event out in the Atlantic. It was a deeply local, national heartbreak, and the country demanded answers.
Now for our final chapter, Section 4, the U.S. investigation, seeking answers and accountability.
This disaster immediately triggered a major U.S. Senate investigation, which was spearheaded by Senator William Alden Smith, a really tenacious lawmaker from Michigan. In fact, even before the surviving crew and executives of the White Star Line could quietly leave the country, Senator Smith intercepted them. He launched a relentless inquiry right at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. It was a dramatic cultural clash, to say the least. You had an American politician fiercely interrogating the elite British shipping magnates, absolutely determined to uncover the exact causes of the sinking and expose the dangerously inadequate safety regulations of the era.
And you know what? Senator Smith's relentless investigation actually became a massive catalyst for monumental international maritime safety reforms. The disaster forced governments around the world to completely overhaul their outdated laws. These new regulations firmly mandated sufficient lifeboats for absolutely every single passenger and crew member on board, totally regardless of the ship's tonnage. It also led directly to the creation of the International Ice Patrol and required 24-hour radio watches alongside the active monitoring of North Atlantic shipping routes. These exact reforms fundamentally reshaped maritime safety, literally setting the standard for the protections that you and I take for granted when we travel today.
To this day, the Titanic remains one of the most studied disasters in human history. It serves as a really sobering reminder of the immense human cost that is often required to force lasting change. While this tragedy originated with a British vessel, the profound loss, the heartbreaking arrival of the survivors in New York, and the fierce, ensuing accountability made it a pivotal, undeniable chapter in American history. It just goes to show how interconnected our world truly was, even way back at the dawn of the 20th century.
The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 abruptly ended an era of Gilded Age innocence. It completely shattered the widespread illusion that mankind's engineering had somehow conquered the natural world. It was a singular, profound tragedy. But it does beg a much larger and honestly more haunting question. If the loss of one single ship could completely upend society and fundamentally change international law, what happens when the entire world is plunged into unprecedented upheaval? Well, we are going to explore exactly that in our next explainer as we turn our focus to America's dramatic entry into World War I. Thanks for joining me. Keep learning.